was stuck inside that grave a long time. Didn't think I'd make it through those long nights, but you never late, you always on time. Remember when you got me out there, you got me out there. And now I see your blessings every day. Thankful that your kingdom's on the way. Angels all around me, hear them sing like, oh, I'll never get used to this. I'll never get used to this. This is how I wanna live. Forever we'll be singing like, oh, walk about the grave, yeah, I'm alive now. Told the devil, boy, you out of time now. Spirit moving in me on my fire now. I know it won't ever die out, won't ever die out. And now I see your blessings every day. Thankful that your kingdom's on the way. Angels all around me, hear them sing like, oh, I'll never get used to this. I'll never get used to this. This is how I wanna live. Forever we'll be singing like, oh, I'll never get used to this.
That's amazing. So amazing, you guys. Just an incredible moment to be able to get a body of believers together to celebrate these decisions for Christ. And so I just want to invite you to join us at the end of the month for our next baptism. And if you believe and profess in the name of Jesus and you've never been baptized, let's take that step. Let's do it. We'll do it all together. We'll celebrate. We'll be there. It's going to be amazing. So we want to invite you to be a part of that. Go ahead and sign up on the Connect card or on the website. I can't express enough how amazing of a moment this is and can be and will be, but also just an amazing life decision. And we want to come alongside of you and support you and walk with you and encourage you and continue to live this life together. So we're excited that you guys are here this morning. My name is Eric. I'm the Next Gen Director. And we're continuing in our series, Song of Songs. So if you want to turn there, Song of Songs chapter 5 specifically today. If you've been with us, you know we've been walking through this journey. We've talked about this idea of courtship. We've talked about what it looks like in marriage, and now we're on the other side. So we're turning the corner of how to live out our faith in and through our marriages. Now, if you're single and you're not married yet, these are great principles for you to be able to learn and understand now, so that when that time comes, if it comes, then you will be able to walk through conflict together, because that's what we're talking about today is conflict. So buckle up, you guys. If you're married in the room, you get it. But I want to just lean into this idea of how amazing marriage is and the beautiful, beautiful creation that God created for marriage to be. Okay, and we know that it's one of his most beautiful creations because if we go back to the beginning of time in the book of Genesis, we know that God made man and woman in his image. And then if we fast forward to the book of Ephesians chapter 2, we know that it says, for we are his handiwork or his masterpiece as a body, like his best work. And so when we have humans that are following Jesus and he says that, hey, that is some of his best work, best creation, and then he creates this union, this covenant relationship called marriage, then we know that it is one of the most beautiful things that can exist. But we also know that if we let worldly ideas and sin enter in, it can become destructive and painful and not fun. And so we want to lean into the idea of how God designed marriage, how God designed us to be able to interact with one another in this marriage covenant, this marriage relationship. And so as we're talking about conflict today, I want to encourage you to resist the temptation to nudge your spouse. Can we do that? Like, get it all out of your system now, because there's going to be a moment where you're like, aha, I can fix them in this message. Like, that's not what it's for. Try to lean into what is my role inside of this marriage and how am I fulfilling what God has called me to as a spouse in this marriage. So lean into that. And if you're single, then lean into some of these truths that you can live out in your faith when it comes to even friendship and interaction with believers and non-believers. Because there are these truths that live and exist within this passage that can allow us to live a better life where Christ can really shine through each and every day. Okay, you guys ready? Okay, on your handout, I want to draw your attention all the way to the top. There's 2 lines. These are lines spoken by both the king and his maiden in chapter 5 of Song of Songs. Now, Song of Songs chapter 5, it is debated whether this is a dream-like sequence or if this is a reality. I'm here to tell you it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because there are truths that exist within that we can draw from and pull from so that we can better live out our lives, okay? So these are two statements. I believe that the heart behind today is posture. Where's your heart postured at? Where is your posture when it comes to conflict within marriage? Where is your posture when it comes to dealing with and navigating conflict? And so that's why I want to bring your attention to these two lines. Listen to these words. This is the king saying this. Open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. Husbands, when's the last time you said that to your wives? Ever. In the context of conflict. Right? Like, there's about to be this moment where there's conflict between them. And he says these amazing words. Now, at first glance, you might be like, why does he call his wife his sister? It's not weird. It's not actually his sister. Actually, this is a very important statement in this line because the idea of a sister or brother signifies for all of life. As much as you'd like to admit that, or as much as you'd like to maybe get rid of your brother or sister, you can't, you know? They're going to be there for all of life. And so for him to call his maiden my sister, it's a statement of I'm committed for life no matter what. It's actually an endearing term of like, you cannot get rid of me. I will be here. And he calls her my darling, my dove, my flawless one. Husbands, last time you were mad at your wives, did you go up to her and say, hey, you are my perfect bride? I mean, try it. I don't know. Like, where's your heart posture? And through the passage, she says this word, and we'll unpack this later in the chapter. Tell him I am faint with love. Wives, in the middle of conflict, when talking to your best friend about your husband, do you say, I'm so in love with him right now? Or are you like, I'm going to find a couch that's on the porch? Like, you know, like, how do you respond? Where's our heart posture at in this? And so as we engage in this interaction that the king and his maiden have in chapter 5, I want to encourage us to be able to, at the exact same time, be able to see and navigate their responses and their posture through it while looking at ourselves and our response and our posture, okay? So we're going to start in verse 2. This is his maiden. I slept, but my heart was awake. Listen, my beloved is knocking. Here's his line. Open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. My head is drenched with dew, my hair with the dampness of the night. Now, at this moment in time, you're like, oh, that's so sweet. Like, he's come home to her. Like, it's amazing. He's talking all of these amazing things about her. And he's even, like, he is imploring her to open the door. He's like, let me in. So he is locked out at this moment in time. And he's like, it is late in the night. There's dew on the ground. And so you can only imagine what time this is. Now, we're going to see her response to him, and I'm just going to guess by her response that he actually showed up a lot later than what he was supposed to. Okay? Wives, you're like, oh, I get this. I've been there. Verse 3, this is his maiden's response. I have taken off my robe. Must I put it on again? I have washed my feet. Must I soil them again? So here's where the conflict comes in. She's like, I'm in bed. I'm not opening the door for you. Like, I'm trying to sleep. And so she's frustrated at him while he's trying to woo her with these kind words. Now, I don't know if this was an unexpected late night rendezvous that he was hoping for, or if he was just coming home when he said he was going to, but I can only imagine their conversation ahead of time. Like, if we were to fast forward to this moment in time in 2024, I imagine this husband and wife's interaction previously went a little like this. He's newly married, so he's still gentle in his words. He's like, hey, like, I love you, but you think I can go hang with my guys? You know, and naturally she was like, yeah, of course. What time are you going to be home? And, you know, he's testing the waters. He's like, 11, 10, 9, 15. You know, like, 9:15. That's a safe number. She goes, fantastic. I'm going to wait up for you. He's like, no, you don't have to. Like, it's fine. 9:15-ish, right? Like, that's totally cool. And then 10:45 rolls around. And he's like, oh, no, like I'm late. And so he comes home, and so that's their interaction, this frustration here. And I don't know if he was out doing his king duties or if he was hanging with his guys or whatever it was. We can look at this passage and go, okay, somehow he arrived at the time that she wasn't expecting, and so now there's conflict within this marriage. She's like, you didn't show up when you were supposed to. Why are you here now? And he's like, but come on. Like, there's dew out here. It's cold. Like, let me in. So here's where we see the conflict begin. And I want to just set a little boundary here as we're talking through this, and especially understanding how we navigate it through our marriages. This is your first fill in the blank, and I think this is an important definition and thing for us to walk through. It's this: conflict in marriage is natural. Fighting is not. Conflict in marriage is natural, and here's why. So we know that God made them male and female, and we also understand that they play different roles. Like a husband and wife plays different roles in the marriage, and together they're creating this amazing union between them. So they're coming together as one, right? We read in Genesis that a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, so that the two can become one flesh. And then we can read in Ephesians chapter 5, starting in verse 22, there are different roles for a wife as there are for a husband. So we can understand in these roles, conflict is going to exist. How we navigate that is going to exist. Look at it this way. Let's look at driving, okay? Married couples in the room. Who is the primary driver? Raise your hand. If you're like, I'm the primary driver, I drive everywhere. Fantastic. Okay. I'm the primary driver in my house. I don't even know if my wife drives. Like, I drive so much, you know? Like, I just drive. However, when I took on this role, I was like, sweet, I've got ownership of how I drive. I didn't think there was going to be conflict around this. It's like, well, I'm driving. But somehow, I get instructions from my passenger, you know? She tells me when the light turns green, a millisecond after it turns green. She tells me when to brake, 2.6 miles before the next car. Like, you guys are getting it, you know? I don't know the things that she grabs onto in the car, like the handle, like foot on the dash. It doesn't help my driving. So there's conflict. Why? Because we're navigating what our roles look like. And I know that's a silly example, but looking at our marriages, we're navigating those roles, so there's conflict. Here's why I don't believe that fighting belongs inside of marriages. And it might be contradictory, and you might be like, well, there's a lot of great teachers that talk about fighting fair or fighting the right way, and I totally get that, and that's amazing. But here's how I view this idea of fighting. Whenever you fight, there's a winner and a loser. Think about it. Any type of fighting interaction, somebody wins and somebody loses. Do you really want your spouse to be the loser in the relationship? We have to begin to look at this idea of fighting and go, okay, that's not the way it should be. There shouldn't be a winner and a loser. And listen, that's the struggle for me. I love competition. I love winning. But when I win in marriage, my wife loses. And that's not healthy. And that's not something we should navigate in our marriages. So I believe that as we're walking through this passage and as we're thinking about not just our marriages, but even think about your friendships if you're not married. Think about your interactions. What would happen if instead of looking to fight or to win, we would look to how do we navigate conflict? What are our action steps to be able to navigate conflict within our lives? How would our relationships shift if both parties we're in a point where they're like, hey, let's navigate this conflict rather than I'm going to fight and there's going to be a winner and a loser. So I just want to look at it from that context as we look at this spouse's interaction. So here we are. The husband wants in. He's on the outside. The wife is like, are you kidding me? I am ready for bed. It's cozy. It's cold outside of the covers. I'm not getting up. Verse 4. My beloved thrust his hand through the latch opening. My heart began to pound for him. So she's in this conflict even within herself, where her natural self is like, no, I'm comfortable, I'm happy right here, but she also yearns for her husband. Now, this translation, my beloved thrust his hand through the latch opening, we need to understand it's not out of rage. He didn't punch a hole in the door, okay? The doors back in this day, they would be designed where there would be a latch opening that he could fit his hand through. And so this is him just imploring her and trying to unlock the door. So husbands, please don't, no holes in doors. Like, if it's locked, it's locked. but her heart began to pound for him. Verse 5. I arose to open for my beloved. So now she has this change of heart midway through. And so as she's wrestling with this conflict within herself, there's a conflict between her and her spouse. And here she is changing her mind. And my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with flowing myrrh on the handles of the bolt. Now, this sounds like a really odd passage. But in ancient history, it was kind of like leaving a bouquet of roses on the front porch. They would take expensive perfumes and lotions and they would put it on the door handle. So it was like a calling card of like saying, hey, I love you, I was here. And so when she opened the door, that's what she noticed. Now, husbands, what a great response, you know? Like he just got fully rejected and he's like, hey, I love you. Like a gentle, loving response. And so we're going to continue to look at both husband and wife here. Let's go to verse 6. We begin to see some ways that we can implement healthy navigation of conflict. Verse 6. I opened for my beloved, but my beloved had left. He was gone. My heart sank at his departure. I looked for him, but did not find him. I called him, but he did not answer. Okay, this is the first thing that I think we can lean into and see her posture and learn. Okay, it's your second fill in the blank. While in conflict, seek after intimacy. While in conflict, seek after intimacy. We see in this verse that now that she's had this quick change of mind, change of heart, she is seeking after her husband. And now let me give some more clarity on this word intimacy, because I think that oftentimes we hear intimacy and we immediately relate that to sex in some sort of way, but that's not what I mean by that. The actual definition of intimacy means a drawing close to, a closeness with one another. And so she is seeking after finding him. They're in the middle of conflict, and she is seeking after being close to him. Even though the conflict started with both of them, now she is trying to find him. She's trying to draw close to him. Imagine in conflict, instead of running away from each other, you ran to each other. You ran toward one another. You decided, hey, we're going to navigate conflict. We're going to be right here. Now, I'll tell you, that's a lot harder to take action on rather than just to say, okay? I am the, sit on the other end of the couch and glare at you conflict person. Like, I'm like, no, I don't want to, I will go to the other end of the room. I want you to be mad at, or know that I'm mad at you, but I don't actually want to interact with you. Like, it's very childish. Like, that's me. But my wife, she's actually one of the most incredible forgivers that I've ever met. And I learned this early on in marriage. We were like 5 or 6 years into our marriage at this point, and we hadn't had a lot of conflict early on in marriage. And we had this moment where we were in conflict. I don't even remember what the conflict was, but I just remember my wife's response to it. So here I am, being a child, and being like, no, I'm mad at you. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to look at you. Like, I don't want any of that. And we have this conflict, and my wife leaves the living room, and I remember she comes back in. Guys, it had to have been like 2 minutes later. Like, I'm just getting to the point where I'm at the peak of madness here, and she goes, hey, what would you like for dinner? I'm like, I would like to not eat with you? Like, what do you mean? She was completely over it. Like, she was like, oh, let's have dinner. And I'm like, I'm mad at you. And she goes, I know, but we're married. Let's have dinner. Eye-opening for me, you guys. Eye-opening. I'm like, but I thought we were going to be mad at each other for at least a couple hours. And it's just this moment of drawing near to one another. Do you draw near to your spouse while you're in conflict? Because if you don't, maybe you should try. Right? So she is desperately seeking after him. She is trying to find him. She's not running from the conflict. She's not hiding from the conflict. She could have stayed in bed. And she's like, no, I need to find him. And I think that's a lesson that will help us while navigating this idea of conflict. Let's continue to see their responses to this. Verse 7. The watchmen found me as they made their rounds in the city. They beat me, they bruised me, they took away my cloak, those watchmen of the walls. Now, sometimes it's difficult to navigate poetic literature and decipher what is literal and what's poetic in nature. Okay, I do not believe that she literally went out in the city and the watchmen beat her, because, I don't know, if you lay a hand on the king's wife, I think death is coming for you. Like, I don't think that's what actually happened. I think in this moment, she's actually describing how she feels on the inside. I believe that this verse tells a story of her emotional pain that she is navigating through. It tells a story of the emotions that she is trying to figure out. And I think this is really important for us to be able to understand, because I think there's a difference in drawing near to one another in intimacy and just pretending like everything is perfect and it's going to be great and everything is solved, and drawing near to one another understanding that there's probably pain on the inside still that we need to navigate through. Right? So husbands, pay attention to that. Like, lean into that. Understand that just because you draw near to each other doesn't mean that it's all over. Wives too. Like, there are emotions that have been walked through during this conflict. And so I think she's describing how she is feeling as she is seeking after her husband. Verse 8, daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, if you find my beloved, what will you tell him? Tell him I am faint with love. Now, ladies, I don't know. When you're in conflict with your husbands and you're talking to your best friends, and they're like, hey, how's your husband? I don't know if your immediate response is this way, but that's her. She's like, tell him I am desperately in love with him. If it were the other way around, I would be like, I am frustrated with him. I am mad at them. But she is telling everybody, no, I'm desperately in love with him. And here's what I believe it shows. I believe it shows humility. So the next fill in the blank, while in conflict, strive after humility. I think that's what it shows. Because she was part of the conflict. Her natural response to her husband was part of the conflict. But now she is striving after humility. She is humble in her response. She's like, I know, like, I acknowledge that part of this was me. I just desperately want to be with him. Tell him I'm so over the top in love with him. I have to be with him. I think that's huge. That's critical when it comes to our marriages. When it comes to even friendship. Think about this if you're not married. You're single. Think about every interaction that you have, whether you have friendships, interactions with believers, interaction with non-believers. How much so would it show the light and the love of Christ if you approached everything with humility? If you were the first one to offer forgiveness, if you were the first one to lean in and try to mend things, if you were the first one to try to fix the relationship, like, how much would that show the light of Christ? You see, this is not just a marriage principle that we need to live with, because we witness Jesus walking this earth with great humility. And he even talked about it. But you see, he's a perfect example for us to look at. And whether married or not married, humility is something that we should walk with each and every day as a body of believers. If we would set aside our pride, how much more could we speak to other people about Jesus? Isn't that ultimately why we're here? Aren't we here to share the light and the love of Christ in hopes that none will perish, that all will be with him? What if we all walked around with a humble spirit, with a humble characteristic, with a humble attitude? See, she is desperately seeking after her husband right now, and she is telling everyone, I am so over the top in love with this man, I have to be with him. While in conflict. I don't know about you, but I'm not good at that. I think this shows us a beautiful image of how we should respond inside of the context of our marriage. Now, she has this interaction with her friends. And her friends ask her some of these questions. They're like, hey, why is your husband so special? Why is this man amazing? Why do you want to be with him so much? You know, I almost take it as like a condescending question. You're like, well, I see the conflict that your husband is putting you through right now. Like, are you sure you want to be with? I see this as the enemy attacking the marriage covenant that God created. You know, actually, I heard a comedian, funny, but this kind of tells you what our society is like right now. He was like, why do we have marriages that last a lifetime? What if we shifted that to where we could sign a 5-year contract or a 10-year contract? And if it's going well, then we can re-sign. We do that with everything else. We do that with homes and cars and insurance and all these things. And he made a joke about it, but the reality is that's what the enemy wants us to believe. The enemy wants to lean into the covenant that came only from God and try to attack it in any way, shape, or form. And I believe right now her friends are attacking that marriage covenant by getting her to, or attempting to get her to second guess their marriage, second guess her spouse, second guess why she's engaged in this relationship. All the while, if we go back to the beginning, when he says, open to me, my sister, lifelong. It's supposed to be a lifelong relationship. And so I don't know about you in your context and with friends around you. Do your friends speak life into your marriage? Or do they take away from that? Do they encourage you to reconcile? Or do they immediately side with you and say, no, we need to fight. We need to win. So your friends are questioning her marriage. And this is the most amazing thing ever. I'm going to read the final section of this chapter, and this is her response to those questions. And I'm going to give you the final fill in the blank before we read this, because I want you guys to be able to notice that although this statement isn't within these verses, the posture is. And so the final fill in the blank is, while in conflict, solve with forgiveness. You're going to see her posture of forgiveness inside of her marriage in this final section, this final passage of Scripture in chapter 5. And if you want a little bit of homework, write down Song of Songs, chapter 6, verse 4. You'll see his response to her. But we're about to witness this amazing response to these doubting, condescending questions of, why is your spouse so great? What's so great about your beloved? And this is her response. Verse 10. My beloved is radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. I don't know if that line would work, ladies, but hey, you can try it on your husband. You're radiant and ruddy. Verse 11, his head is pure as gold. His hair is wavy and black as a raven. His eyes are like doves by the water streams, washed in milk, mounted like jewels. His cheeks are like beds of spice, yielding perfume. His lips are like lilies dripping with myrrh. That one would definitely work. Verse 14, his arms are rods of gold set with topaz. His body is like polished ivory decorated with lapis lazuli. His legs are pillars of marble. He does not skip leg day, set on bases of pure gold. Don't skip leg day, okay? Listen, you want to tell your husband that one? That'll definitely work. Legs are pillars of marble. Wow, that's amazing. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as its cedars. His mouth is sweetness itself. He is altogether lovely. This is my beloved. This is my friend, daughters of Jerusalem. Think if you responded to a question while in conflict with your spouse about why you are with them like that. Is that your response? Is that your response while in conflict? To have this posture of forgiveness. It doesn't matter what the conflict is. I love you. I am here with you forever and always. I'm not going to create division and separation between us, but instead we are going to draw near to one another. Is that your response? Because if it isn't, we need to make some adjustments. Because this is in the middle of conflict for her, and she immediately responds with all of the amazing characteristics that she probably would have quoted on their wedding day. Do you remember the characteristics that you thought of your spouse on your wedding day? Do you remember those in the middle of conflict? And you know, this idea of solving with forgiveness, yeah, it absolutely works inside of the context of marriage, but even if you're not married, think if you were the first one to forgive in your friend group. Think if you were the first one to chase after it, to seek after it, to solve things with it, rather than being prideful and holding on to something forever. You know that Jesus forgave you long before you asked for it? That Jesus sacrificed himself long before you knew? Like, that's the attitude, that's the posture that we need to be taking, not just in our marriages, but outside of our marriages as well. We need to solve things with forgiveness. Everything else divides us. Jesus is the unifying factor. And especially when talking about the covenant of marriage, the only way that marriages work is if they are firmly grounded and founded upon the foundation of Jesus. That's how they work. And so we need to live that out in the same way. We need to be able to lean into them the way that Jesus would. Marriage is a beautiful image of Christ in the church, and look at how Jesus deals with us daily, forgiving us, meeting us where we're at, walking with us, encouraging us, being there no matter what. He doesn't, in the moment that we are distant from him, he's not distant from us. He's still right here. So why shouldn't we treat our spouse the same way? I know it's hard, but look how beautiful it could be. Instead of this silly conflict, dividing them for days. And if you're married, I've been there. Silly conflict, divide for days. They immediately sought after drawing close to one another. They immediately sought after forgiveness and humility. Even in the king's response as he left the door, leaving her a love note, it's a humble response. It's not an angry response. He didn't leave out of anger. And then she desperately sought after him every single moment after that. Here's what I want to encourage. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22. This week, married couples, go home and read that. Read it separately, and then read it together. But let's shift our perspective and our posture while reading it. So if you've been married at any amount of time, you're like, nope, I know the passage, Eric, I got it. Here's what I'm going to encourage you to do and ask you to do. Husbands, don't start in verse 22. 22 is not for you. That's not for you. Skip down until it says husbands. That's for you. Focus on that. Focus on how to love your wife like Christ loved the church. And if you are not doing that, then make some adjustments and lean into that. Do not look at verse 22 and demand or command or encourage your wife to be that. That's not for you. Okay, wives, same thing. Don't go to the husband section and say, listen, you're not loving me fully. Like, don't do that. That causes division. Wives, go to verse 22. Fully read it. Fully lean into what God meant when he gave the Apostle Paul those words. And begin to live that out in the context of your marriage. I think a lot of the division that exists within marriage is far too often, and I'm guilty of this, I will look at my spouse and say, but you're not, or I want you to do this, instead of looking at myself and going, am I the godly husband that I am supposed to be? And I think that if we would look internally, we'd begin to see conflict resolved quicker, we would begin to see less fighting and more navigating. And if you're single, go home and read that passage too. You want to do yourself a favor? Learn how to be a godly spouse before you become a spouse. Save you a lot of headache. Learn how to be that. I have so many conversations, not just with high schoolers, young adults, of like, but I'm looking for a godly woman. And my first question is, are you a godly man? Because if you're not, stop looking for a godly woman. First become a godly man. First become a godly woman. And then allow God to bring those together. But here's the reality. At all times, in our marriages, we should be seeking after intimacy, drawing close to one another. I don't think that God mixed up his words when he said, the two shall become one. Why would we try to separate that with silly conflicts in this world? And whether we're married or not, we should strive for humility. We should take that posture for the one moment, the one hope that somebody will see Jesus through our actions or our words. And we should solve with forgiveness. We should openly be forgiving. And that's one that I've struggled with a lot. I've wrestled with that idea my whole life. I'm like, well, do they deserve it? None of us do. But we should offer it, because that's what Christ did. Let's pray. Father, we just come before you knowing that as we navigate both marriages and relationships, that it's difficult. It's difficult to be able to see through conflict. It's difficult to be able to see how we should respond. And so, God, I pray that you will help us. Each as individuals, God, I pray that you will help us to see what it is that you have called us to be. God, help us to navigate conflict better. Help us to eliminate the idea of winners and losers inside of our marriage and instead strive for unity together. God, I just pray for everyone that you will just show up in a mighty way in each of their lives and show them and teach them. God, be with us as we navigate this amazing, beautiful covenant, but also difficult one. God, help us to be humble. Help us to offer forgiveness. God, help us to seek after our spouses, even in those moments of conflict. So God, thank you for giving us your word. Thank you for giving us your truth. Thank you for sacrificing your son when we don't deserve it.